Ambassador Tak stared through the viewport as Earth grew larger in the distance. His slender blue fingers tightened around the padded armrest of his command chair, trying to hide his nervousness from the crew. "Final approach to Earth orbit," announced the pilot. "Atmospheric conditions are significantly more volatile than our simulations predicted." Tak nodded, his large eyes blinking rapidly. The Illuvian diplomatic vessel was the most advanced in their fleet, but Earth's harsh environment tested even their technology. Storm clouds swirled across the planet's surface, lightning flashing between them. Such violent weather was unknown on the Illuvian homeworld, where gentle rains and mild temperatures prevailed. "Class 12 Deathworld," Tak whispered to himself. How could anything intelligent evolve in such conditions? Tak had volunteered for this mission despite the warnings from the Council of Elders. 300 cycles ago, the Illuvians had attempted contact with the Morax, another Deathworld species. The results had been catastrophic. 2 colony worlds lost and millions of Illuvians killed before the Galactic Confederation intervened. Since then, his people had avoided Deathworlders, focusing on peaceful trade with species from gentle worlds like their own. But humans had achieved faster-than-light travel, making contact inevitable. Better a controlled first meeting than an accidental one. "Ambassador," said his aide Hana, "the human representatives have transmitted landing coordinates." The diplomatic shuttle separated from the main vessel, beginning its descent through Earth's atmosphere. Tak reviewed the briefing materials one final time. Humans were physically robust compared to Illuvians. Denser bones, stronger muscles, more efficient respiratory systems. Their planet's high gravity and abundant predators had shaped them into potential threats, but intelligence reports suggested they possessed art, music, and philosophy. "Perhaps they have overcome their evolutionary programming," Tak said hopefully. The shuttle suddenly lurched sideways, throwing Tak against his restraints. Warning lights flashed across the control panels. "Atmospheric disturbance," the pilot reported, her voice tight. "Stronger than anticipated. Primary stabilizers failing." Tak gripped his seat as the shuttle shook violently. On the Illuvian homeworld, such weather would be considered a once-in-a-lifetime catastrophe. On Earth, it was merely a strong thunderstorm. "Can we abort and return to the main vessel?" Tak asked. The pilot shook her head. "Negative, Ambassador. We're committed to the descent now." The shuttle's communication system crackled to life with a human voice, speaking the standard Confederation language. "Illuvian vessel, we detect you're experiencing stabilizer failure. Maintain current trajectory. Emergency teams are being dispatched to your landing zone." More alarms sounded as the shuttle broke through the cloud layer. Below, Tak could see human structures, a landing facility surrounded by buildings of various sizes. The shuttle was dropping too fast now, the ground rushing up to meet them. "Brace for impact," the pilot announced, her voice steady despite the danger. The shuttle hit the ground hard, skidding across the landing pad. Metal screeched against concrete. Something in the engine compartment exploded, and acrid smoke filled the cabin. Emergency systems activated, spraying fire suppressant throughout the shuttle. Tak's vision blurred as he fought against his instinct to freeze in the face of danger, the natural Illuvian response to threats. Through the damaged viewport, he saw shapes moving in the smoke outside. Humans, running toward the shuttle. "They're coming," Hana whispered fearfully. "The Deathworlders are coming." The shuttle's hatch had been damaged in the crash and wouldn't open. Through the viewport, Tak watched a human attach something to the door. There was a sharp hissing sound, and the hatch fell away. Smoke poured out of the shuttle as humans entered. They wore protective gear and carried equipment Tak didn't recognize. Their movements were quick and decisive, terrifyingly efficient to Illuvian eyes. One human approached Tak, removing a face covering to reveal pink skin and small, rounded eyes. "Ambassador, can you understand me? Are you injured?" Tak managed to overcome his freeze response enough to reply. We are mostly unharmed." "The crash. Don't worry about that now," the human said. "We need to get you out before the fuel cells rupture." Another human was helping the pilot, who had suffered a head injury. Two more were assisting Hannah and the communications officer. They moved with purpose but without aggression, guiding rather than forcing the Illuvians. Outside, rain poured down as the humans led them to a sheltered area. Medical personnel immediately began examining the injured Illuvians. Tak noticed one human had suffered burns on his hands while helping extract them from the hot metal of the shuttle, yet he continued working without complaint. "Ambassador Tak," said a human woman approaching him. "I'm Director Park of Earth's Diplomatic Corps. I apologize for the dangerous landing conditions." Tak stared at her, struggling to reconcile his expectations with what he was witnessing. "Your people, they risked themselves for us." Director Park looked confused. "Of course we did. Did you expect we would let you die? But you are from a death world. Your species, our information suggested." Understanding dawned on Director Park's face. "Ah, you believe the Confederation classification would determine our behavior." She smiled slightly. "Ambassador, we may have evolved in harsh conditions, but that's precisely why we value life so highly. We know how fragile it can be." As if to punctuate her words, a tremendous explosion rocked the landing pad as the shuttle's fuel cells finally ruptured. Tak watched in amazement as humans continued working despite the danger, fighting to contain the blaze. Later that evening, safely inside the human diplomatic compound, Tak updated his report to the Council of Elders. The humans had provided comfortable quarters adjusted to Illuvian environmental preferences. They had shared their art, music, and literature, much of which celebrated cooperation and mutual support. "Perhaps," Tak wrote, "we have misunderstood the nature of Deathworlders. The same evolutionary pressures that made humans physically resilient also seems to have fostered remarkable cooperation and empathy. They understand better than we do that survival often depends on helping others." As Tak finished his report, he gazed out at the stormy Earth night, seeing the harsh world with new eyes. The humans had not merely survived their death world. They had learned from it lessons the Illuvians had never needed to learn on their gentle planet. And perhaps those lessons made them not more dangerous, but more valuable allies than anyone in the Confederation had imagined. Captain Juwu walked through the corridors of the Illuvian space station, Harmony Point, with her back straight and her face neutral, painfully aware of how the Illuvian crew members pressed themselves against the walls to avoid coming near her. 6 weeks into the deployment, and still they reacted to humans as if they were dangerous animals that might attack at any moment. "Just keep moving," she muttered to Sergeant Doyun, who walked beside her. "They'll get used to us eventually." "They better get used to us soon," Doyun replied quietly. "The Kel fleet will reach their outer colonies in less than 20 days." The station's curved hallways led them to the command center where Commander Sora, the Illuvian station leader, waited with his senior staff. The Illuvians stood nearly as tall as humans but were much thinner, with delicate limbs and large, expressive eyes. Their blue-tinted skin seemed to shimmer under the station's lights. "Captain Juwu." Commander Sora greeted her formally. "We are prepared to begin the Joint Emergency Response Drill." Juwu nodded. "My team is ready as well." She glanced at the Illuvian officers, noticing how they avoided eye contact with the humans. This training exercise, simulating responses to station emergencies, was crucial to building cooperation between their species. Commander Sora gestured to a holographic display of the station. "The scenario will simulate a cascading failure in the life support systems in Section 12. Mixed teams will respond according to standard Illuvian protocols. With respect, Commander," Juwu said, "we should incorporate human emergency protocols as well. Different approaches might complement each other." The Illuvian officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, Lieutenant Jinsu, spoke up. "Human protocols are designed for Earth conditions and human physiology. They may not be appropriate for Illuvian technology." "That's exactly why we need to practice together," Juwu insisted. "In a real emergency, we'll need to combine our knowledge." After some discussion, Commander Sora reluctantly agreed. The mixed teams, each containing 3 Illuvians and 2 humans, took their positions around the station. Juwu joined a team led by Jinsu, who barely acknowledged her presence. "Beginning simulation in 3, 2, 1, announced the station's computer. Suddenly, the lights in Section 12 flickered and dimmed. Warning indicators flashed across control panels. The simulation had begun, but then alarms began blaring throughout the entire station. "This isn't part of the drill," Jinsu said, his voice rising in pitch. "Something's actually wrong." The station's main computer announced, "Warning. Actual life support failure detected in Section 10. Toxic atmosphere release. Power fluctuations affecting multiple systems." Juwu watched as the Illuvian crew members seemed to freeze in place, their eyes wide with fear. This was their species' instinctive response to danger, a momentary paralysis while their minds processed the threat. On their gentle homeworld with few predators, this response had served them well. In the complex environment of a space station, it could be deadly. "Sergeant Doyun, get emergency breathers for the Illuvians," Juwu ordered, already moving toward the environmental control panel. "Lieutenant Jinsu, I need access to the life support systems." Jinsu blinked rapidly, fighting against his instinctive freeze. The access codes. Juwu didn't wait. She pulled up the emergency override procedures she had memorized during her preparation for this mission. Computer, Emergency Situation Alpha, Human Alliance Protocol. Grant temporary access to all systems. To her relief, the computer responded, "Access granted." Warning: atmospheric contamination spreading to adjacent sections. The station shuddered as emergency bulkheads began closing. Juwu quickly assessed the situation. A coolant leak had mixed with the atmospheric processors, creating toxic gases that were being distributed throughout the station. Meanwhile, the power systems were fluctuating wildly, causing critical systems to fail. "We need to isolate Section 10 completely and reroute life support from the auxiliary systems," she said. By now, Jinsu had recovered from his freeze. "That's impossible. The auxiliary systems aren't designed to handle that load." "Then we'll modify them," Juwu replied, already pulling tools from her belt. "On Earth, we train for improvisation. Show me the access panels." As they worked, more humans arrived, bringing emergency equipment and medical supplies. The Illuvians watched in amazement as the humans moved confidently through the crisis, communicating in short, clear sentences and adapting to each new problem without hesitation. When toxic gas began seeping through a damaged seal, Sergeant Doyun simply wrapped his uniform jacket around his face and continued working on the power relays. When standard tools couldn't reach a critical valve, a human engineer fashioned a makeshift tool from spare parts. When the computer systems began failing, they switched to manual overrides without missing a beat. 2 hours later, the crisis was contained. Section 10 remained sealed off, but the rest of the station had stable life support and power. In the command center, humans and Illuvians gathered to assess the damage. "I don't understand," Commander Sora said, looking at the humans with new eyes. "How did you continue functioning during such chaos?" There was no clear protocol for this specific emergency. Captain Juwu smiled slightly. "On Earth, chaos is part of daily life. Storms, earthquakes, floods, we grow up expecting the unexpected. We train to improvise because we have to." Lieutenant Jinsu stepped forward. His earlier reservations seemed forgotten. "You saved this station. I watched you work, Captain. Your people never hesitated, never froze. And your people provided crucial knowledge of the station's systems once you recovered from the initial shock." Juwu replied. "Neither of us could have managed alone." The atmosphere in the room had changed. The Illuvians no longer pressed themselves against the walls to avoid the humans. Instead, they moved closer, asking questions about human emergency training and offering insights about station systems. Later that night, as repairs continued, Juwu found Jinsu in the observation dome, staring out at the stars. "I've been thinking," he said without turning around. "We Illuvians have always seen our freeze response as a weakness when dealing with Deathworlders. But perhaps we've been looking at it wrong." "How so?" Ju asked. "Your species rushes into danger without hesitation. Sometimes that's necessary, but sometimes it leads to reckless actions. Our momentary pause, our assessment before action, could complement your immediate response. Different strengths working together." Ju smiled. "Different evolutionary paths leading to complementary abilities. I like that way of thinking about it." As she looked out at the stars, Ju realized something had fundamentally changed today. For the first time, the Illuvians were seeing humans not as terrifying Deathworlders, but as valuable allies whose very differences made them essential partners. And the humans were beginning to understand that the gentler evolution of the Illuvians had created strengths of its own. Strengths that might balance human intensity with Illuvian wisdom. The Kell were still coming. The real test still lay ahead, but today had proven that adaptation was possible. Not just technological adaptation, but the more profound adaptation of two species learning to see each other's differences as assets rather than barriers. The massive view screen on the bridge of the Earth vessel Dauntless showed the approaching Kell Armada, nearly 300 warships arranged in perfect attack formation. Captain Ju stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her face calm despite the odds they faced. "They're right on time," she said, exactly as intelligence predicted. Lieutenant Commander Do-yun nodded grimly. 67 Illuvian ships, 23 human vessels. We're outnumbered exactly 3-1. The nascent moons, a cluster of 7 moons orbiting a gas giant, had become the Alliance's primary defensive position. If it fell, the route to the Illuvian homeworld would be wide open. Every available ship had been called to defend it. "All ships reporting ready, Captain," said the communications officer. "The Illuvians are in position." Ju studied the tactical display. The Illuvian ships had formed a beautiful, mathematically perfect defensive pattern, each vessel positioned to support the others, creating overlapping fields of fire. It was textbook Illuvian doctrine, refined over centuries of theoretical battle simulations. "Too predictable," Ju muttered to herself. She opened a channel to Commander Jinsu, who led the Illuvian forces. "Commander, I suggest we modify our formation. The Kell will have studied your standard tactics." The blue-skinned Illuvian appeared on screen. "Captain, our defensive formations are based on optimal mathematical models. They cannot be improved upon." "Mathematics doesn't account for psychology," Ju replied. "The Kell expect you to follow doctrine. That makes you predictable." Before Jinsu could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. The tactical officer shouted, "Captain, the Kell are deploying something, not weapons fire. Some kind of particles or gas clouds." Ju watched as faint bluish clouds drifted from the lid Kell vessels, spreading toward the Illuvian lines. "Analysis. Unknown composition," her science officer reported. "But it's not affecting our systems." The communications channel suddenly filled with distress calls from the Illuvian ships. Jinsu's image on the view screen showed him struggling to remain upright, his large eyes blinking rapidly. "Bioweapon," he gasped. "Targeting our neural systems." The perfect Illuvian formation began to break apart as ships drifted out of position. Some stopped responding entirely, while others moved erratically, their crews incapacitated by whatever the Kell had deployed. "It's not affecting humans," Do-yun realized. "They designed it specifically for Illuvian biology." Ju made her decision instantly. "All human ships maintain defensive positions. Prepare boarding parties immediately. We're taking control of the Illuvian vessels." Her officers stared at her in shock. "Captain, we barely understand how to operate our ally ships," the tactical officer protested. "We don't need to understand them perfectly. We just need to keep them fighting," Ju replied. "The Kell are expecting those ships to be neutralized. We're going to surprise them." Within minutes, shuttlecraft departed from all human vessels, racing toward the drifting Illuvian ships. Ju watched from the Dauntless as her crew and those of other Earth ships launched this desperate gambit. "The Kel fleet is accelerating," reported the tactical officer. "They're moving to exploit the gaps in our formation." "Hold position," Ju ordered. "Give our boarding teams time." On board the Illuvian flagship Serene Harmony, Lieutenant Kim led his boarding team through corridors filled with incapacitated Illuvians. The slender aliens lay where they had fallen, still conscious but unable to control their movements, their bodies locked in a severe version of their natural freeze response. "Engineering first," Kim ordered his team. "Then weapons, then bridge. Move." The human team had studied Illuvian ship layouts, but finding their way through the unfamiliar design proved challenging. When they finally reached engineering, they found Chief Engineer Minji, one of the few Illuvians still partially functional. "The bioagent affects our motor control," she explained, her speech slurred. "But I can guide you." Following her instructions, the humans took up positions at the engineering controls. Similar scenes played out across dozens of Illuvian vessels as human teams raced to get the ships operational again. Back on the Dauntless, Ju watched as the first of the rescued Illuvian ships began to power up again. Then another and another. "The Kel are in range," reported the tactical officer. "They're launching their first attack wave." "All operational ships, engage," Ju ordered. "Human-crewed Illuvian vessels. Break formation and attack at will." What followed astonished even the most experienced officers on both sides. The Kel had studied Illuvian battle tactics for years, preparing counters for every standard maneuver. But now the Illuvian ships moved in ways the Kel had never seen before, aggressive, unpredictable patterns that bore the unmistakable mark of human combat doctrine. A group of 5 Illuvian cruisers, now piloted by humans, dove directly into the center of a Kel formation, scattering their carefully arranged ships. Another trio performed a high-speed slingshot around one of the moons, emerging behind a Kel battle group to attack from an unexpected angle. "They don't know what to make of us," Do-hyun said, watching the Kel forces struggling to adapt. Ju nodded. "They prepared for Illuvian precision. They got human improvisation instead." The battle raged for hours. The Dauntless took heavy damage, losing shields and suffering multiple hull breaches. 3 human-crewed Illuvian vessels were destroyed, and several more crippled. But the Kel, confused by the unexpected tactics and unable to rely on their prepared counter-strategies, began to lose cohesion. The turning point came when an Illuvian science vessel, repurposed by its human crew as a makeshift weapons platform, managed to capture samples of the Kel bioweapon and modify the ship's atmospheric filters to purify the affected Illuvian ships. As Illuvian crews began to recover, human and Illuvian forces started working in true concert. Human unpredictability combined with Illuvian precision. When the Kel commander finally ordered a retreat, nearly half their fleet had been damaged or destroyed. The nascent moons remained under Alliance control, and the path to the Illuvian homeworld remained protected. In the aftermath, Captain Ju stood in the observation lounge of the damaged Dauntless, watching as repair crews moved between the surviving ships. Commander Jinsu joined her, still moving stiffly as the last effects of the bioweapon wore off. "Your people saved us today," he said simply. "Not just our ships, but perhaps our entire civilization." Ju shook her head. "We all saved each other. Humans provided the unpredictability the Kel weren't expecting, but we couldn't have done it without Illuvian technology and those crew members who guided us." Jinsu gazed out at the ships working together among the moons. "For generations, my people feared Deathworlders. We saw only the danger in your strength, your aggression, your comfort with violence. We never understood that these qualities evolve for protection, not just destruction. And we humans have much to learn from your patience, your precision, your commitment to harmony." Ju replied. "Different evolutionary paths, complementary strengths." As repair craft moved between human and Illuvian vessels, Zhu knew the Battle of Nascent Moons would be remembered not just for its strategic importance, but for what it represented, the moment when two fundamentally different species truly began to understand each other's value. In the quiet years after the Great Battle, something amazing happened between humans and Illuvians. Their alliance grew from a place of fear and misunderstanding into a deep friendship that changed both species forever. Tak, who once fought against humans, now worked as the High Commissioner of Alliance Affairs. He watched with wonder as young Illuvian and human children played together inside a large habitat dome on the Illuvian home planet. Their laughter echoed through the transparent walls, a sound that would have been impossible just years before. The Illuvians learned much from humans. They began to see problems differently, approaching challenges with a creativity and adaptability they had never known before. Human determination and quick thinking sparked something new in their systematic culture. They started to take risks, to imagine solutions that went beyond their traditional ways of thinking. Humans, in turn, gained incredible advantages from Illuvian science. Bioengineering helped them adjust to space travel in ways they could never have imagined. Their bodies became more resilient, able to survive in environments that would have been deadly just a short time ago. The Illuvian medical knowledge transformed human potential for exploration and survival. Their children represented the most beautiful part of this transformation. They didn't see differences. They saw friends. Illuvian children with their smooth, silvery skin played alongside human children with their varied colors and features. They shared games, learned each other's languages, and grew up believing that their two species were simply part of one larger community. Tak remembered the battles, the fear, and the misunderstandings. Now, looking at these children, he understood that true progress wasn't about winning wars, but about building understanding. Each species had kept its unique identity while creating something stronger together. The habitat dome became a symbol of hope. It showed that two completely different beings could not just coexist, but truly connect. Technology, compassion, and a willingness to understand each other had bridged gaps that once seemed impossible to cross. As the children continued to play, Tak smiled. The future looked bright, full of possibilities that neither humans nor Illuvians could have created alone. Their alliance was more than a partnership. It was a new way of existing in the universe.